On this episode of L&D Disrupt, I'm joined by Winnie Amoaku, UK Partnerships Manager at HiBob, to discuss the relationship between HR and L&D and what's needed for it to work, be successful, drive impact, flourish, all of those good things. Winnie, before we get into it, I'd love for people to hear a bit about who you are, your role at HiBob, and your experience in the people space.
Yeah, so my name's Winnie. I work at HiBob as a partnerships manager. I've been at HiBob for 4 years on the sales side and also now on the partnership side. And I've been in the HR space for 10 years now, which feels like more than a lifetime. So many different themes and eras over the last 10 years. So focusing on engagement at the moment, in the past, legal compliance, benchmarking, salary data. So I've lots of anything related to data engagement and information around HR.
Nice. How did you get into HR? What tempted you to head into that space?
So I guess I'm an idealist. So I love the idea of HR because it's one of those departments that has a set of like core values and morals built in. There's certain behaviors you would expect in proximity to HR that maybe are less so outside of that space. So I really like the idea that it's working towards workplace culture and it being positive and the engagement between people, the people and the business. So that's the kind of thing that interests me in general. And I love anything related to, this is so nerdy, I love anything related to like processes. Optimizing processes, I love it. I love it whenever you see something that could be made better and you make it more efficient. And HR is like a lot about that.
Oh, I feel you 100%. Every time I go on holiday, it's spreadsheet time. I need to have everything organized into columns. The process has to be good. No, I love that. Perfect. So like I said, we were going to dive into this topic of HR and L&D, the relationship, how they work together. And I wanted to start off by asking you, in companies that have a defined HR and L&D team or separate teams, what do you see the roles and responsibilities of each being, and how do they complement each other, those two teams?
So I think they both play essential roles in attracting, retaining, and developing people throughout the organization. And when they're two separate functions, HR more on the side doing the casework, talent acquisition, compliance, comp and bens, engagement, and then L&D focusing on career development, training, knowledge management, performance improvement. But they're both working towards the same goal. So they're both essentially working to create a dynamic, skilled, and engaged workforce that's growing in real time, making sure that if there's a skills gap, it's being closed and in the most efficient way, and also providing an actual benefit to employees, because employees these days, they want to be constantly challenged and growing and not stagnant. So it's making them more valuable in the market, in the general market out there for their next role, as well as to their current company, making sure that they have like the best skills, the most up-to-date skills. So I think they work so well together, and either when they're separate and also whenever it's one department, because they're both focusing on growth for the business, and finding out what those people need, what the business needs, and making sure that everything's in place to make sure that the people are thriving, which means the business is thriving, because most of business is the people and the skills that they bring.
No, I love that. I think it's interesting. We often hear the term internal customers, and maybe this is like my marketing brain making sense of it, but L&D teams and HR teams are often serving the same internal customers. So of course they would, I guess, naturally complement each other and want to be aligned, because if we're targeting the same people, do we want consistent messaging to them? Do we want to be hitting them with messaging at the same time? So there's all these other little nuances around how they serve the same group of people, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the core of it, yeah, they are really doing similar but different. The L&D on its own, it can go really deep into those core areas that are making people stay because they're growing, they're becoming more valuable. There's something sticky there. They can see the future and what they could become because there's a process in place for them to evolve.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is they're both people centric, like you said about the focusing on sort of the people side of the business growth. Both teams are
Yeah.
there to help people perform, but there's a real human angle to it of being aspirational to understanding what motivates you. So I guess as well, it's both of them are in this space where it's a fulfilling role for them as well, HR and L&D teams, and ultimately they both want people to succeed, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Cool. And then obviously moving on to how they both work together, I saw this study recently from Udemy that showed that the top three surgeon HR skills were recruiting, hiring, and talent. But we're in this period of talent shortage where hiring's becoming more difficult and building from within is becoming more sustainable. So I guess the question is, how important is it for HR teams to have an understanding of upskilling people and helping them build skills? Or in those larger companies with the separate teams, how important is it that HR and L&D are aligned on that mission to upskill people with relevant skills?
Yeah, I think it's really important and maybe critical. And although it's a problem that there's a problem in the market where there's a skills shortage, I think this is a good thing to focus inwards and focus on the people you already have, because a lot of the time people leave when it's boring and people leave when they're not challenged. And there are skills within a business that are just overlooked. Um, so I think in one sense, of course, it's tricky because well, it's tricky because there's a shortage, but at the same time, I do think it's good to look internally. So I think it's really important for L&D to understand what the wider HR goals are and wider business goals are, and make sure that there's a direct correlation. There's like a clear alignment um, between L&D, HR, and then the general company goals. So yeah, it's really quite important. You need really great data as well to make sure that you understand those kind of what are they called, water cooler chat. Those are great to add a little bit of context, but if you don't really understand your people and have like a really deep understanding of their current skill sets and their aspirations, their personal aspirations, their career aspirations, new qualifications that they may receive, like because they have like time out of work and they've done like an evening course, you need to still be having all that information and capture it properly so you can see what your actual gaps are. I think well, I have definitely worked in teams and where you can see them hiring for something that I'm like, but why do they not ask like Sally over there? Do they like she's definitely overqualified to do that. She's got time. I know she's got time. So it's for me, I think it's a good thing looking inward, assessing what you've got. It's more efficient, it's more cost effective. You're going to make it stickier for your employees and a better culture because you're keeping it in house, keeping like the vibe that you've so like expensively curated by hiring those people in the first
Mm.
place.
Yeah, no, there's so much in there I wanted to follow up on. I guess the first thing would be, again, what you said there highlights why they need to work together, HR and L&D, because all of the stuff that makes up that really insightful data puzzle that you just mentioned there comes from the teams working together. So HR might have insights onto qualifications that people have got that L&D didn't know that they could tap into to upskill other people. HR teams might be able to get good information from L&D teams on, I don't know, like stuff people are doing on the job and in their role that then might also influence that internal mobility thing. So yeah, I suppose it's like the two really complement each other and they kind of have to work together if you're going to do it in that informed way that you mentioned.
100%. They have to really understand the goals of the business of the department and also the capabilities on every single level for it to be efficient. Also for it to be interesting for the employees as well. Because when you're like just throwing people on a course because it feels like, oh, this might be relevant, and you're dealing with people at different levels of skill, you end up wasting time, money, and general resources overall.
Yeah. The weirdest example I see of that and I've experienced is we're coming up to the end of the year. I have this learning budget and then I'm getting a conversation that's like, please go and do a course before we lose the learning budget. We spoke
Yeah.
a bit earlier about being aligned to maybe the organizational goals and wanting return on investment. But if you're a HR team and you're overseeing the overall learning budgets and it's just getting spent on stuff for the sake of it, then that doesn't give you ROI. If you're the learner, you don't get ROI on the time you invest. And if you're a manager, you don't get ROI on any of it because you sent a person to do something that's taken them out of their job, that isn't relevant, that doesn't help you as a team of people you're leading. So yeah, this kind of just for the sake of it, and it really is the enemy of the impact and the cost effectiveness that we're kind of talking about.
Yeah, that's so true. And the ROI is a really great thing to focus on, because sometimes I think it feels hard to quantify, especially if you don't have data in the first place to have a good assessment of where are we right now, like on a data level rather than just a water cooler level, so that you can track the progress, assess the value, make a stage 2 plan, and optimize and grow each time. Yeah, the ROI is like a great thing to put on the agenda.
Yeah. And being data led is so important in things like this. You actually reminded me when you made that point about an Amazon example that I remember. They essentially looked at what their fastest growing roles were over a 5-year period. Then they looked at all of those roles, and then working with the L&D team, upskilled people to go into those roles internally. So it was basically like operational roles and some of their warehouse roles where they'd seen the highest growth in people they had to hire. They used that as an indication to go, these are the people we could help build the skills because these are the fastest growing roles in the business. And that kind of real time informed, one team knows the whole full scope of it and they share it with the other team, so they're not doing stuff just for the sake of it. It's, for me, that's like a really smart example of how that's done in practice.
That's a great example. Yeah.
I guess the only challenges that I always see is when it's like a company like Amazon, is it like, how easy is it actually to apply that on into a day-to-day, because they'll have like maybe a big team of data analysts, they'll have a really slick sophisticated system. So I guess it's maybe just taking the principles and applying it to the day-to-day.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that that's hard to replicate if you have a good system and process to collect your data in real time, and really good analysis of your data. Like, you're right, there are like prerequisites to make those kind of decisions and strategic decisions. But I think to having the data in general, and the ability to interpret it should be like a core skill of like standard HR. But I love data, so I'm biased.
No, but it's a fair point, and actually it makes me think some of the stuff we're talking about, actually you need to have the right foundations in place and the right skill before you do it, because if you don't, all you'll do is do it badly. So for example, like you said, if we don't have good data infrastructure, we shouldn't try and use data to upskill or be more effective in HR and L&D. And also, if we personally don't have the skills, we should probably build those before we start trying to be data analyst. And of course, there's the stuff we can do on the job and learn as we do it, but there will be these core fundamentals as well, won't there?
Yeah, that's so right. And I guess yeah, it always starts, I guess, at the on the inward level, and looking at like what you've got and then building logically, not trying to run before you walk. But as like goals, I think that Amazon example is like perfect, and not unattainable for the average business at all.
Yeah, that's true. I need to stop saying put the cart before the horse, because I'm not sure if that's actually a well-known saying, but don't put the cart before the horse, but don't run before you can walk is probably a more relatable example. So I might just add that to my brain instead.
I like them both.
Yeah, they both work. Everyone has its place. I
Yeah.
wanted to follow up. You mentioned about like internal mobility. We talked about sort of employee engagement earlier. And I wanted to ask you about HR and L&D teams working together on the employee benefits package and the employee benefits offering, because there was this other survey I read recently that showed the growth in what was important to employees versus last year. And career goals and purpose wasn't the highest number one on the list, but it was the one that had seen the most growth. So it was 15% higher than last year. People saying their career goals and their purpose were more important to them in their role. So how do you think HR and L&D teams can collaborate, or what do you think is the best way to ensure development opportunities are part of that wider offering to your employees?
Mm. Yeah, great question. I think it comes back to the idea that the company needs to have clear missions that are cascaded down at every single level. It should be clear what each department, each function, and each person is doing in relation to those goals. And then also how it benefits the individual person as well. Because there has to be a clear benefit for someone to get to be engaged, to enjoy the journey, and to give like as much as like they should be giving. They have to see the benefit to themselves, and also being part of that wider corporate goal and department goal and everything creates a purpose to your everyday. So having those clear goals, I think, is important to working together, because it means everybody's moving in the same direction at every level. And for an employee to see how the business is investing in them, because L&D is like not a cheap, not a casual thing. It's like highly strategic. It requires investment and of time and money, and it's important then to communicate the value to the employees, because otherwise it's kind of wasted. And we are in this time of, I guess, work, which I love, where people don't just do things because your boss told you to do it. Like, they'll just quit. They're like, why are you making me do this nonsense? So I think it is important to communicate the value for that reason. It's a retention thing at the end of the day. And having learning and people development projects and content really tailored to the individual person makes it engaging, and then it becomes part of the company's retention strategy. Again, having that single mission to make sure that it's all related, everything's related, it makes sense. So they're always working together, HR and L&D, and the C-suite goals and objectives, the individual employee, everybody's working in the same direction. So like tools like yours, like Hanoi, where you're curating and delivering really highly and only highly relevant learning experiences. It's not just content, it's not just information, it fits into the flow of work. And so it all makes sense in any direction you look at it. It makes sense to the business, to the individual, to the department, to the goals overall. And it's something that as an employee you can take away with you to your next company. So it's more likely that if it's highly relevant and related to your current role and your general interest, that you're going to go head first into it and make the most of it overall.
Yeah, that is so true, because if we can paint a compelling picture for the purpose you have every day, and it's something that inspires you, then why would you leave a company? And I think that ties into maybe a shift in the role for both HR and L&D teams to be sort of a facilitator or a translator. It doesn't, I can attend an all hands where we talk about the company purpose, but the chances of that really connecting with me on a personal level and filtering down in the right way doesn't necessarily happen for every person. So for HR and L&D teams to be able to break down the overall company objectives and say, this is the things you can do every day to contribute to that, then you've got a clear, like you said, purpose of my day-to-day role contributes to this overall business goal, and it develops me as a person. And then essentially the case for a retention is made then, isn't it? Because why would you leave? You do this great thing every day, and that the company's hitting its goals and you're playing this part in it. And yeah, I really like that synced up idea in terms of strategy. Cool. I'm going to move on to another question I wanted to ask you. Mm-hmm. And it is about the employer brand. We just spoke about retention. This is kind of a nice segue. That should have made a nicer segue than I'll ask you another question, but here we are. So it's about how they can work together, HR and L&D teams, to build out their employer brand and retain talent. I'm seeing a lot of companies talking about making development a big part of their employer brand. And there feels like this relationship between HR and L&D. So we spoke about L&D teams maybe being able to tap into internal experts to leverage and collate knowledge, and then make that available to everyone else. That makes that person feel really valued, and maybe it's something that's leveraged in the HR performance reviews or the surveys that the HR team capture, Or for example, if the L&D team is creating paths for people to progress and there's a real good story to tell, could the HR and people teams out there and the talent teams take those human stories and then really use that to sell their employer brand? So yeah, I know I've just given you a lot of examples there, but I guess the question is, how can HR and L&D combine to create this great employer brand and retain and attract good talent?
So I think a lot of the employer brand comes from the people and the culture, and the way you treat people makes a massive difference. So if you have a person with um, knowledge and information, and you basically give them the kudos for that and the attention that is like deserved for when they share it, then it makes a nice feeling for the employee, but also for the colleagues as well. I don't think it's really a nice to have. I think it's really important, essential, and also efficient as well. So when you've got internal knowledge that you don't leverage to equip with other employees, you end up essentially with little hotspots of knowledge and information of success and failure throughout the business. You're not creating consistency. You can be really good friends with someone and that's how you know they have the information you need, and that maybe you don't really speak to them and you don't know that they could solve your problem with that information. So from a business process efficiency perspective, I think it's really important to be aligned for L&D and HR, because it creates that internal culture of appreciation, but also efficiency as well. Like your companies that are inefficient, that is going to be a part of your employer brand. People are going to talk about that on Glassdoor, and when they leave and with their friends, oh, my role's okay, but it's just not efficient. I don't know how to do this or how to do that. It becomes your story. So I think it's like really important, and having internal experts leveling the playing field, it just means that you don't end up with those like peaks and troughs. Someone's gone on sick and that person has the information that you need to get it done. You got peaks and troughs for no reason. And those personal relationships you're never gonna know everyone in a medium or large company. Proximity to power as well. Sometimes people have information and they gatekeep it from their colleagues. Maybe they feel competitive about it and they're not rewarded for sharing that information. So why should they? It's just like human nature, I think. So I think correctly disseminating that information from external experts and making sure that everyone's aligned on why you're doing it, how to do it, it means it's a part of your retention story and your employer brand, because you're creating efficiency, which becomes like part of who you are as well.
We call it the leaky bucket at How Now. So the leaky bucket is your knowledge bucket that has these small holes where if we slack the same question and answer to each other 20 times and we don't save it, we have that issue of consistency that you mentioned. And then if someone leaves the company and we haven't captured any of the great stuff they've built up in their head, it just gushes all over the top of the bucket and you lose loads of information. And a couple of times you mentioned that great idea that skills we give people now might help them in their next role. So if people grow in and maybe this isn't the right place for them to grow, maybe they will leave. So we have to make sure we are, like you said, leveling the playing field, connecting people to other people, know the stuff they need to know, creating a consistent place where they can get consistent answers, because otherwise you will just lose knowledge more so than you realize, I think.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most expensive parts of attrition is knowledge that's just lost. So if you keep that steady and flowing, it means you don't get those like hiccups. So you've got loads of great new starters with all the right qualifications and experience, but none of the, or not enough of the right internal information to get them fully up to speed in time. And again, it creates that inconsistency, which is just so avoidable when you've got like a nice process to share information, keep it flowing, keep it steady, and make people feel like they have the information to do their jobs. There's nothing worse than knowing that you could do it, but you're missing a piece of the puzzle and you can't find it. Infuriating.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've never heard anyone mention that point about inefficiency in your process is also part of your employer brand or your employee experience, because we'll always hear these common pain points of people leave because of culture, people leave because of their managers, people leave because they aren't challenged, but people might also leave because it's just a really frustrating place to work and your tech stack doesn't work properly, or
Definitely.
we just do everything the long way and we could be doing it so much more efficiently, and maybe there's resistance to change. So I like this idea of maybe taking a wider view of what your employer brand is or your employee experience, because it will be all these other little things like the inefficiencies.
Totally. I think especially millennials, Gen Z, because outside of work, life is pretty efficient. Like, you know how to get stuff done. We have Uber, we've got delivery, we've got home delivery, groceries, take the tube, a train, the buses, everything is quite efficient, generally speaking. So when you go to work and you're like, hold on, that becomes your story, because people talk about that. Anything which just causes that emotion to make people talk about your company becomes part of your brand story.
Yeah, and especially like you said, if there's that disconnect between the way I learn and the tools I use in the real world are super efficient and they're engaging and they're great. And if there's a disconnect between that and what I do at work, like I don't have the numbers to hand, but there was a study, two of the people's biggest frustrations around the technology they use is that they were outdated or difficult to use and they didn't talk to each other or integrate. But whereas you think outside of work, all of our tools we use sync up, like your login maybe to Spotify is your Facebook account. You can connect all these different apps together so you don't have to go from one to the other and app switch and context switch. So I guess it's managing expectations as well in or meeting expectations, because like you said, if I can scroll through Netflix and find something, or if Netflix is really smart at recommending content for me but the stuff at work isn't, then that also is I guess part of the employer brand and employee experience.
100%. I think a modern company is told by its like tech story. Like, how good is your tech? How much does it make sense? How many hoops I need to go through to do this simple thing? And it definitely, I think for the generation coming into the workforce at the moment is like uh sometimes a deal breaker. Because it affects your whole experience. Yeah.
It's interesting because that's probably another place where HR and L&D can overlap, is the tech stack and making sure it works for people. So, we might internally survey people and find that 90% of our people listen to audio content to learn. And that might influence our choice of the content providers we pick or the platform we decide to use. Or most people say they learn from influencers on LinkedIn. Should that drive our strategy to capture knowledge from internal experts, but create more of a feed that looks like LinkedIn, where it feels like something I can engage with or tag other people on? So I guess that's another consideration for where HR and L&D teams intersect is, does your tech work together? Does it meet the expectations of your workforce? Can it be slicker in the way it's used? Are we siloed? There's all these issues, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Siloed information is like, oh, it this is again the nerd part of me. I can't, there's so many ways you can connect your data that I'm like, why would you not do that? And sometimes I can understand that it might not be high on the agenda, but you end up with bad data if you don't have a single source of truth, if your data doesn't all speak to each other, if you can't get it to the right people at the right time in a format that makes sense to them. It's really useless, and you're giving yourself extra jobs for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And without kind of turning this into how HiBob and How Now work together, but that is
Yeah,
a good example, because your people data can be the single source of truth in HiBob. And then you can use that integrated with How Now and then personalize things like the groups of people you create to send content out to. You don't have to update the people on your learning system when they leave, and therefore the system's clogged up with all these people that actually left the company. Data on maybe qualifications and skills can be mapped over. So yeah, it's interesting that, like you said, people will maybe add in friction that doesn't need to be there when they could be building a tech stack of stuff that really talks to each other. And like I said, maybe I can add the link in the description of this episode. But yeah, this study around how much it infuriates employees to be waiting for information they need, constantly context and app switching, or just having this cumbersome tech stack that kind of delays their progress.
yeah. And I guess sometimes I'll say a lot of the time it's not intentional. It's just that inherited legacy systems or processes, but and it feels like a big deal to change, but the benefit is just like it's like hand washing your clothes versus a washing machine. Like nobody goes back
Yeah.
ever.
No, that's it. Speaking from experience, it's just like I can't be bothered to set up the washing machine though, because I've used
Yeah,
tools that I've known in the back of my head are like, I don't need this tool anymore. I know I could move over to this other thing, but like you said, the benefits are untold. It's just that risk aversion maybe or change aversion with the perceived effort to set something up is often what delays people. But then you always find, like when you move to the washing machine, you will say, why didn't I do this 6 months ago? Because my life now
yeah,
is infinitely easier.
yeah, definitely.
That leads us nicely to the final question I wanted to ask you, and it's about tech adoption, HR's role, because HiBob just put out some really interesting research with CIPD. It's a great quote in there that says, in today's business world, HR tech adoption and the automation of business and people processes is also the only way to keep up with the exceptional pace of the market and achieve our superhuman goals. So again, I'll link that in the description. But the question, I guess, is how can HR help drive that digital transformation and the tech adoption, and any sort of final tips you might share on how people can do that?
Yeah, I think it goes back again to having an understanding how the whole company strategy relates to your department and your role, and how what you're introducing can alleviate pain around the business, process pain, business pain, and make things better. So understanding what each department and each level of the business needs to achieve and how they're going to do it, and then how you can help address that with the technology you've got. And like the base level for that is you need to be tech savvy. And if you're not tech savvy, you need to just get a consultant or hire someone who is tech savvy, because there are so many different types of technology out there, different functionality, different prices, different benefits, that you need to really understand the tech landscape. And it's also constantly changing. You can get a company which was really great 5 years ago, had no investment, and therefore is totally out of date because they didn't innovate at all. And vice versa as well. So having a tech savvy team is like, I think, or someone you can speak to who is tech savvy, I think is really important. And creating a culture of innovation as well. So promoting a culture of how can we make this better, and how can we make sure that we've got the right thing for now and the future, or something that can flex the future as well. And of course, there's gonna be change management and things like that. But if you have, there's always going to be someone in each department who just loves tech, or just has they really feel that pain of the problem, and so they'll do anything to get rid of it. And so they're like invested in the solution. So
Mhm.
having those digital champions around the business related to the tools that you're bringing in, I think is really key as well.
Yeah.
Makes the change a lot less like daunting.
Yeah. Funny enough, I was laughing then because I have people that I sometimes call the unofficial IT department, because I'm not the best with tech. And then if I'm facing a problem, there's those people, you just know they're going to solve the problem, or think of them as the people that if they saw you doing it over your shoulder, they would be like, let me intervene because this is
Yeah.
painful watching you do it. So you will have those people in your business. There's 100%. I've seen them in every team. I really
Yeah.
agree with this tech savvy part and the innovation. And I just wanted to follow up on the first point you made around problem discovery, because actually that is where the pitfalls sometimes lie.
Mm.
That has to be the first foundation, is discovering the real problems that need to be solved, especially with tech, because if we then do go to the market to look for something, or we want to brief in a tech savvy consultant to do it, unless we're briefing in the problem, they won't know the exact solution to go and look for us. And it might mean we end up going looking for a particular type of software as opposed to a tool that could solve our problem. So pigeonholing ourselves into like an acronym of some kind, rather than going, look, I need this tool to, like we said earlier, just collect data and knowledge in one place, as opposed to it being scattered everywhere. So I think that problem discovery is the sort of pillar for me, or from my experience, of making sure everything else that follows is sort of in order.
Yeah, you're totally right. And Sometimes the problem discovery can be maybe a little bit lopsided because you're seeing it just from your perspective, where actually the ROI isn't fully quantified if you haven't checked throughout the business who's affected and how much, and the cost of the time it takes to go around the issue instead of having a process that eliminates it. I think I totally agree with you. That has to be like the main foundation of the whole any tech adoption that you're trying to do.
And if you do that point that you said of working out how much pain is felt where, you can also prioritize a little bit, which will help you get buy-in, and I guess will help with adoption, because if you know 80% of people that you speak to as you do problem discovery face this similar challenge, if your tech is geared towards solving that, you're going to get better buy-in, you're going to get more adoption, in theory anyway, at least.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Well, Winnie, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation, and it's made me think about a few things I hadn't thought about before, especially this infrastructure and sort of process also being a big part of your employer brand. So I will think about that in a sort of a bit more detail. Maybe there's some more content in there, because I'm always thinking about content as the end angle. I'm afraid it's just the part of my brain. But yeah, thank you so much. I'll put a link to your profile in the description as well, so people can go and find you and connect with you on there.
Thanks so much.